Why is my daughter's father in your house?
The mansion was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. Ariel Brooks stood in the center of the Whitman Estate's grand foyer, clutching her cleaning cloth like it was the only thing keeping her steady. She had cleaned dozens of houses before, but never one like this. The walls gleamed with white marble. The chandeliers sparkled like trapped stars, and every inch of the place whispered wealth and history. She'd only been on the job 2 days when she noticed the portrait. It was enormous, stretching nearly from floor to ceiling, framed in heavy gold leaf. The family looked like royalty. The Whitmans, all in cream-colored suits and pearls, smiling as if the world had never said no to them. But her eyes froze on the young man, standing to the right of the matriarch. His hair, his smile, his eyes, those same blue-gray eyes that once promised her forever. Her chest tightened. No, it couldn't be. She took a step closer, her breath catching in her throat. The nameplate read, "The Whitman Family, 2015. The man in the painting was Ethan Whitman. The same Ethan who had held her hands under the summer sky and told her he loved her. The same Ethan who vanished without a word 8 years ago, leaving her pregnant, alone, and broken. Ariel's knees nearly gave out. Her mind flashed back to those days, the warm Carolina nights when they talk about dreams, when he swore that love could conquer anything. He never told her his last name, said his family was complicated. She thought it was just a line, a shy man's excuse for mystery. But now, standing in this house, surrounded by people who would never welcome someone like her, she finally understood what complicated meant. Her fingers trembled as she touched the edge of the frame. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking. The memory of his laughter, his scent, his gentle voice. It all came rushing back, flooding her chest with grief she thought she'd buried years ago. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Ariel spun around, heart racing. Standing by the door was Mrs. Whitman herself, tall, elegant, silver hair pulled into a tight bun, eyes sharp as glass. She was the kind of woman whose silence demanded obedience. She watched Ariel for a long moment, her lips pressed together, unreadable. "Is something wrong, Miss Brooks?" Her voice was smooth, practiced, the kind of voice used to giving orders. Ariel swallowed hard, forcing her hands behind her back. "No, ma'am," she managed, just admiring the portrait. Mrs. Whitman's gaze drifted toward the painting. Her face didn't change, but something dark flickered behind her eyes. "Ah," she said quietly. "My son. Handsome, isn't he?" Ariel felt her stomach twist. "Your son?" The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She tried to find words, any words. "Yes, ma'am. He looks familiar." Mrs. Whitman tilted her head, studying her face like a hawk watching a field mouse. "You think so?" Ariel nodded quickly, but her hands were shaking. "Maybe I've just seen him somewhere before." The older woman took a step closer. Her perfume was sharp, roses and steel. "You couldn't have," she said softly. "He's been gone a long time." Ariel forced a polite smile, but her heart was thundering. Gone? What did that mean? Dead? Missing? Hidden? Mrs. Whitman's eyes lingered on her, scanning her face, her skin, her nervous hands. Then, without another word, she turned and glided toward the hallway, her heels tapping against the marble floor. Just before she disappeared around the corner, she said, almost to herself, "It's strange, though. You look like someone he once knew." The words hit Ariel like a slap. She stood frozen, staring at the portrait, her reflection faintly shimmering in the glass beside Ethan's painted face. Her breath hitched as she whispered, "Ma'am, why is my daughter's father in your portrait?" A soft gust of air passed through the room, and for a moment it felt like the house itself had heard her. Then, from the hallway, Mrs. Whitman's voice echoed back, calm and chilling. "What did you just say?" The memory came rushing back like sunlight after rain. Charleston, summer of 2014. The year everything in Ariel's life had still felt possible. She was 22, juggling 2 jobs and a community college scholarship, working mornings at a diner by the pier. That's where she first met him. Ethan wasn't like the other customers. Most were impatient tourists, but he always sat by the window, reading, smiling whenever she passed by. He ordered the same thing every morning: black coffee, blueberry pancakes, and a side of bacon he never touched. He'd say, "It's for you. You look like you could use breakfast too." She'd laugh, blush, and say no, but sometimes on hard days, she'd eat the bacon anyway. He was quiet but curious. Asked her about her dreams, her mother, her favorite songs. Never about her struggles, as if he already knew she carried enough weight. He'd walk her home after late shifts, talking about how he didn't believe people were born into value. They earned it. She'd tease him. "You sound like one of those college boys trying to sound deep." He'd grin and say, "Maybe I am." For months, their friendship bloomed into something beautiful. He'd bring her flowers from the farmer's market, cheap but thoughtful. He'd sneak her into rooftop concerts, where they'd dance barefoot to songs neither of them knew the words to. And when he kissed her for the first time, it wasn't fireworks. It was quiet, steady, like a promise. But there were small things she ignored then, things that only made sense later. He'd never let her visit his apartment. He never talked about his parents. When she asked about his job, he'd smile and say, "Family business." When she pressed further, he'd change the subject. She thought he was just private, maybe embarrassed about something. She didn't know he was hiding an entire world. Then came that night. They had spent the evening by the water, laughing about nothing, wrapped in each other's warmth. Ethan had kissed her forehead and whispered, "No matter what happens, I want you to remember this. I love you." She'd laughed. What kind of line is that? But when she woke up the next morning, his phone went straight to voicemail. His apartment was empty. No clothes, no toothbrush, no trace he'd ever been there. Days turned into weeks, then months. No word, no note, nothing. Ariel's heart broke in slow motion. And when she discovered she was pregnant, the ache turned to fire. Anger. She cursed him every night. "How could you do this to me?" She worked through her pregnancy alone, ignoring the whispers, the pitying glances. By the time Ella was born, she'd buried Ethan in her memory. Or so she thought. Years later, sitting on her small apartment bed after another long shift, Ariel's phone buzzed. The number was unknown. The message was short. "He didn't leave you. He was taken." Her hands went cold. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. Taken? By who? She whispered Ethan's name again, as if saying it out loud would bring him back. But outside, thunder rolled over the city, and she suddenly knew that whatever had happened to him wasn't over. The next morning, Ariel arrived at the Whitman mansion earlier than usual. Her hands trembled slightly as she tied her apron, but she forced herself to breathe, to act normal. She needed this job. Rent was due, Ella's school fees were late, and her savings were thin as paper. Whatever this house was hiding, she couldn't afford to walk away. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Every time she walked past the grand staircase, her eyes drifted back to that portrait, Ethan's familiar smile haunting her like a ghost that refused to rest. In the kitchen, the other staff whispered when she walked in. The butler, Mr. Collins, offered a polite nod, but the two maids at the counter went silent mid-sentence. She caught fragments. "Looks just like her," Mrs. Whitman said, and then quiet. Ariel kept her head down, scrubbing countertops that were already spotless. She told herself to focus. This wasn't about the past. This was about Ella, about survival. But the tension in the air was too thick to ignore. After lunch, Mrs. Whitman appeared in the doorway. Her posture, as always, was perfect, chin lifted, pearl necklace gleaming under the soft chandelier light. "Miss Brooks," she said, her tone smooth as cream but heavy with authority. "I'd like you to handle a special task this afternoon." "Yes, ma'am," Ariel said quickly, trying not to meet her eyes. Mrs. Whitman's gaze lingered, assessing her like a specimen under glass. "There's a room upstairs, the one at the end of the west corridor. It hasn't been touched in years. I'd like you to clean it thoroughly." Ariel's stomach nodded. "Of course. Any particular reason it hasn't been used?" The older woman's lips pressed into a thin line. "It belonged to my son," she said quietly. "He passed some time ago. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Ariel's pulse raced. Past. The word echoed in her head. But when she looked into Mrs. Whitman's eyes, she didn't see grief. She saw something colder. Guilt, maybe. Or shame. Yes, ma'am, Ariel whispered, gripping her cleaning bucket so tightly her knuckles whitened. The climb up the marble staircase felt endless. Each step echoed against the silence until she reached a dark wooden door at the very end of the hallway. The brass handle was cool under her palm. When she pushed it open, dust floated through the sunlight like ghostly snow. Everything was exactly as it must have been the day Ethan left. His books stacked neatly on the shelf. A guitar propped in the corner. A photograph of him standing on the beach, smiling at the camera, wearing the same bracelet she once made for him. Her breath caught. It was the same bracelet she'd tied around his wrist before he disappeared. Blue cord, silver bead, her initials engraved on the charm. She touched it gently, tears stinging her eyes. "You kept it," she whispered. Then she noticed something else. A half-written letter lay on his desk, edges yellowed with time. Her name was scrawled across the top in his handwriting, Ariel. Her knees weakened. She reached for it, heart pounding, when a shadow fell across the doorway. Mrs. Whitman stood there, watching her. Her voice was quiet but sharp as glass. "You shouldn't be in here yet." Ariel froze, the letter still trembling in her hands. The older woman's expression didn't change, but her eyes, they were glistening just barely. "That room," she said softly, "was supposed to stay locked." Ariel's voice cracked. "What?" Mrs. Whitman stepped closer. "Because some doors," she whispered, "should never be reopened." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Ariel alone in Ethan's room, the unfinished letter still burning in her trembling hands. It had been one of those perfect Carolina evenings, the kind that smelled of salt and jasmine, when the world felt kind and small. Ariel had cooked dinner in her little apartment, her heart racing with the kind of joy she hadn't known before Ethan. He'd promised to come by after a talk with his father. He never told her what it was about, only that it was important. When he arrived, he looked different, shoulders tense, eyes red, his usual calm replaced by quiet panic. She touched his arm. "Ethan, what happened?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at her, as if memorizing her face. Then he said, "My father knows." Her chest tightened. "Knows what?" "About us," he whispered. Ariel stepped back. She knew his family had money, but she didn't know how much power that word Whitman carried until that moment. Ethan explained that his father had found out about her, that he'd followed him, hired people to dig into her background. The man knew everything, where she worked, where she lived, her mother's address, even her school records. Ethan's voice broke as he said it. "He called you a mistake. Said I'm throwing away generations of legacy for..." He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Ariel didn't need him to. The silence filled in the word for him. She sank into a chair, her stomach twisting. "What are you going to do?" "I told him I love you," Ethan said. "That nothing he says will change that." She smiled weakly, wanting to believe that love could be enough. But deep down, fear crept in. His father wasn't just another man. He was one of the richest, most powerful businessmen in South Carolina. People didn't say no to Richard Whitman. That night, Ethan swore he would stand up to his father. "He can't control me forever," he said, cupping her face. "We'll leave. I'll take care of you." But when she woke the next morning, Ethan was gone. At first, she thought maybe he was cooling off after an argument. But hours passed. His phone went straight to voicemail. No one at his job had seen him. His apartment was empty, his car missing. And then the news broke. Prominent businessman's son killed in boating accident. Ariel stared at the television screen, her heart turning to stone. Ethan's photograph flashed across the news, the same smile that once lit up her world. The police called it an accident. The papers called it a tragedy. She called it a nightmare. Days later, she received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a note, one sentence written in shaky handwriting. "He didn't die." They made it look that way. Ariel's hand shook so hard she nearly dropped it. She reread it over and over, her breath coming faster each time. Was Ethan alive? Or was this some cruel trick? A ghost refusing to rest? Either way, she knew one thing for sure. The Whitman family had secrets, and she was standing right in the middle of them. The next day, the mansion felt colder. Not from the air conditioning that hummed through every hall, but from something deeper, a stillness that pressed against Ariel's chest like a warning. Every sound, every shadow seemed sharper. Even the ticking of the antique clocks felt louder, as if the house itself was listening. She returned to Ethan's room when no one was around. Mrs. Whitman had ordered it locked again, but Ariel had quietly made a copy of the key. Something inside her refused to let go. She needed to know the truth. The moment she stepped inside, the air felt heavy, like walking into a memory she wasn't supposed to disturb. Dust still floated through the light from the window, swirling in lazy spirals. Ethan's books were still in order, his shoes still by the bed. It was as if time had frozen the moment he disappeared. She started cleaning slowly, not because she wanted to, but because it gave her an excuse to look, to search. She checked drawers, the closet, under the desk. Everything looked ordinary, until her mop brushed against something hard beneath the bed. She crouched down and reached underneath, fingers brushing against cool metal. When she pulled it out, her breath caught in her throat. It was a watch, old silver, engraved on the back with the initials EW. Ethan Whitman. But what froze her blood wasn't the engraving. It was the sound. The watch was still ticking. 8 years had passed, yet its second hand moved steadily, as if it had been wound yesterday. Ariel stared at it in disbelief, the faint rhythmic clicks echoing in the silent room. The sound filled her ears, hypnotic and terrifying. She sat on the edge of the bed, clutching it to her chest. "What are you trying to tell me?" she whispered, her voice trembling. As she turned it over in her hand, she noticed something, a faint scratch near the clasp. It wasn't random. It looked like writing etched into the metal with something sharp. She squinted under the light. 2 words. Still here. Her pulse quickened. Still here. What did that mean? Was he alive? Watching her? A chill ran through her as she stood, scanning the room. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't alone. The air had shifted, thicker, heavier. She backed toward the door, her hands shaking. "I'm imagining things," she whispered to herself. "It's just a watch." But then, a sound. Soft. Close. Her name. Ariel. She froze. The whisper came from behind her, low and breathy, right by her ear. She turned sharply, but no one was there. Only the reflection of her own wide eyes staring back from the mirror across the room. Her heart hammered. She stumbled backward, clutching the ticking watch like a weapon. "Who's there?" Silence. Then the whisper again, this time from the corner of the room, faint but unmistakable. "Find me." The watch ticked louder, faster, echoing in rhythm with her racing heart. Ariel bolted out of the room, slamming the door behind her. Down the hall, hidden behind a half-open door, Mrs. Whitman stood in the shadows, listening. Her expression didn't move, but her hand trembled slightly as she whispered to herself. She's starting to hear him too. The next few days passed like fog, heavy, confusing, filled with the echo of that whisper. Ariel barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that ticking watch and heard Ethan's voice calling her name from somewhere between the walls. But fear wasn't the only thing driving her now. It was curiosity, a burning need to understand the truth. During lunch, she found herself in the laundry room with Mr. Collins, the butler who had worked for the Whitmans for nearly 40 years. He was polite but distant, his gray hair trimmed neatly, his face unreadable. Still, something about his eyes told her he knew more than he let on. She took a risk. "Mr. Collins," she said quietly, "how long have you worked for this family?" He gave a faint smile. "Since before you were born, Miss Brooks." "And Ethan," she pressed. "You knew him." The smile faded. Everyone knew him. Kind boy. Too kind for this house. Ariel leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Collins hesitated, then sighed. "The Whitmans built their fortune long before your time. Old money. Old rules. This house was founded on a code of blood. As Mr. Richard used to say, only pure lineage, only Whitman heirs. They mixed business with heritage, and heritage mint skin. A chill ran through her. You mean? He nodded grimly. Yes, Miss Brooks. That kind of code. They've changed their language over the years, but not their hearts. The words stung. So that's why Ethan hid her. Why he never introduced her to his family. Why his father called her a mistake. It wasn't shame, it was fear. Fear of what his family would do if they found out. Collins continued, his voice low. When Ethan fell in love with you, he broke generations of rules. Richard Whitman saw that as betrayal, not love. There were whispers, arguments behind closed doors, threats about inheritance, even lawyers. I warned Ethan to be careful. Ariel's hands tightened around her mop handle, and then he vanished. The old man's eyes softened. Sometimes, Miss Brooks, people don't vanish. They're made to disappear. Her breath caught. What do you mean? But before he could answer, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Mrs. Whitman's sharp voice cut through the silence. Collins, I need you in the study. The butler stood, gave Ariel one last look, one that said be careful, and left. When she was alone again, Ariel turned to continue folding linens. That's when she noticed the drawer slightly ajar at the bottom of the cabinet. Inside were stacks of old documents, family records, birth certificates, financial papers, and something else. A white envelope, sealed, the edges slightly yellowed. Her name was written on it. Ariel. Her pulse quickened. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. The handwriting, she'd recognize it anywhere. It was Ethan's. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She looked around. No one was near. Carefully, she tore open the seal. Inside was a single page, folded twice. Her hand shook as she opened it and began to read. If you're reading this, it means my father found out. Don't trust anyone in this house. Not even my mother. They'll tell you I'm dead, but I'm not. The ink stopped mid-sentence, a jagged line where the pen had broken off. Ariel's blood ran cold. Outside the laundry room window, thunder rolled across the sky. And somewhere in the house, faint, distant, a door slammed shut by itself. The memory came back to her that night like a wound reopening. 8 years earlier, in a small county hospital on the south side of Charleston, Ariel lay trembling on a narrow bed, clutching her stomach as pain tore through her like fire. She was alone. The nurse's voice was calm but distant, drowned out by the sound of her own heartbeat and the emptiness beside her. There was no Ethan holding her hand, no promise that everything would be all right, just the cold hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of her own cries bouncing off stairwell walls. When the doctor placed the tiny baby in her arms, Ariel wept, not just from exhaustion, but from heartbreak. Her daughter's skin was the color of warm honey, her hair a soft swirl of curls. She opened her eyes, and Ariel gasped. They were the same pale blue-gray she used to fall into every night. Ethan's eyes. She smiled through the tears. Hey, baby, she whispered, kissing her forehead. It's just us now. The nurse asked what name she wanted on the birth certificate. Ariel looked down at her daughter and said softly, Ella. For the first few weeks, life blurred into sleepless nights and quiet lullabies. She worked when she could, waited tables when her mother could babysit, and sometimes skipped meals so her baby wouldn't have to. She didn't complain. She couldn't afford to. Every morning, she whispered to Ella, We're going to be okay. I promise. But the world wasn't kind to women like her. Young, single, black, and struggling. Rent went up, bills piled high, and people judged her for the ring she didn't wear. Yet she kept going. She cleaned houses, folded laundry at hotels, and even worked late shifts at a diner just to keep Ella's tiny world safe. Still, on the quiet nights, when Ella slept against her chest, Ariel would stare at the old photograph she kept hidden in her wallet. Her and Ethan on the beach, laughing, her head resting on his shoulder. She'd trace the edge of his smile with her thumb and whisper, Why did you leave me? Then came a night everything changed. It was a rainy Tuesday. Ella had just turned 1. Ariel had finished her shift at the diner and was walking home through the narrow streets, shielding her daughter under an old umbrella. When she reached her building, a black sedan sat idling across the street. The windows were tinted, the engine humming low. A man in a dark coat stepped out. He was tall, with a hat pulled low over his face. Ariel's instincts screamed to run, but something in his voice froze her. "Miss Brooks." She clutched Ella closer. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. He simply reached into his coat pocket and handed her a small velvet box. "This is from someone who never stopped loving you." Then he turned and disappeared into the rain. Ariel stood there shaking, the box slick in her wet hands. When she finally opened it, she gasped. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, engraved with the letters E+, Ethan, and Ariel. She fell to her knees, clutching it to her chest, the rain mingling with her tears. For the first time in years, she dared to believe he might still be alive. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains of Ariel's apartment, casting soft gold over the breakfast table. Ella sat across from her, spooning cereal and humming to herself, her curls bouncing with every movement. She was 7 now, bright, curious, and endlessly talkative. Every time Ariel looked at her, she saw the best and worst parts of her past. That morning, as she watched her daughter laugh, something inside her shifted. For years, she had hidden the truth, the love, the loss, the pain, trying to protect Ella from the shadows of a story too heavy for a child. But now, after what she had uncovered in the mansion, the letter, the grave, Mrs. Whitman's chilling words, silence no longer felt like safety. It felt like a lie. "Ella," she said gently. The little girl looked up, milk on her lip. "Yeah, Mama." Ariel smiled faintly, wiping her mouth with a napkin. "You ever wonder about your dad?" Ella blinked, curious. "You said he went away." Ariel hesitated, her heart twisting. "He did, but it's more complicated than that." Ella tilted her head, waiting. Ariel took a deep breath. "Your daddy loved us very much. He didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because people made him. Bad people." Ella asked softly. "Yes," Ariel whispered. "People who didn't like that we were different, that I was me and he was him." Ella frowned in the innocent way only children can. "That's dumb." Ariel chuckled through the lump in her throat. "It is, baby. Very dumb." She took Ella's hand, squeezing it gently. "He would have loved you so much. You got his eyes, you know that." Ella smiled proudly. "Then he must have had pretty eyes." Tears welled up in Ariel's eyes, but she blinked them away. "He did." That night, Ariel couldn't stop thinking about those words, "You've got his eyes." The resemblance was undeniable now, even to her. Every day, Ella looked more like Ethan. It scared her and comforted her all at once. When the weekend came, Ariel didn't have a babysitter, so she took Ella with her to work at the mansion. She knew it was risky, but she couldn't leave her home alone. "Stay close to me, okay?" she told her daughter as they stepped inside the gleaming marble foyer. Ella's eyes widened as she looked around. "Mama, it's like a castle." Ariel smiled nervously. "Just remember, no touching." She gave Ella a coloring book and set her on a couch in the sunroom while she dusted the shelves nearby. For a while, everything was calm. The sound of pencils on paper filled the quiet air. But then, the rhythm broke, the soft click of heels on tile. Mrs. Whitman entered the room. Her gaze fell on the little girl sitting in the sunlight. For a long, silent moment, she didn't move. Her face drained of color, her eyes wide, her breath catching in her throat. Ariel turned just in time to see the expression shift, disbelief, then fear. "Mrs. Whitman," she started, "this is my daughter, Ella." The older woman cut her off, her voice barely a whisper. "She has his eyes." The color in Ariel's face vanished. Mrs. Whitman's hand trembled against her pearl necklace as she stared at Ella like she was seeing a ghost. "Where," she said slowly, her tone quivering between rage and terror, "did you get that child?" The air in the room turned heavy, every sound swallowed by silence. And Ariel knew, in that moment, that the truth was no longer safe to hide. By the following week, the mansion no longer felt like a place of work. It felt like a battlefield. Whispers trailed Ariel wherever she went, floating just beyond earshot, but sharp enough to cut. The staff had always been polite, distant, professional. Now, they moved around her as if she carried something contagious. "Did you see the little girl?" One maid whispered in the hallway. "Looks just like him." Another muttered near the kitchen. "Mrs. Whitman won't stand for this." Not again. Ariel tried to drown them out, but every word burned. She focused on her chores, scrubbing, folding, polishing, the same way she'd learned to survive every insult life had thrown at her. But deep inside, anger simmered. Quiet, steady, dangerous. At lunch, she found herself alone in the pantry, picking at a sandwich she couldn't taste. She thought of quitting, just walking out, never coming back. The paycheck wasn't worth this humiliation. But then she pictured Ella, her smile, her curiosity, her innocence. She couldn't risk losing income. Not yet. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Whitman's reaction. That frozen expression, the trembling hand clutching her pearls. She has his eyes. That look wasn't shock alone. It was recognition. Fear. Something inside Ariel whispered, "There's more they're hiding." That afternoon, while dusting the upstairs study, she noticed a locked cabinet built into the wall. It was newer than the rest of the furniture, the wood less faded. Curiosity tugged at her. She remembered how Mr. Collins always carried a ring of keys, one of which fit nearly every door in the mansion. She waited until the house was quiet. When the butler stepped out for his evening rounds, she slipped into the hall and took the ring from the hook near his desk. Her heart hammered as she tested key after key until one clicked. The cabinet opened with a soft creak. Inside were rows of leather-bound ledgers, family records, financial documents, and a small lockbox at the back. She hesitated, then found a tiny latch and forced it open with a letter opener. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue, were photographs, Ethan's photographs. But these weren't from before he disappeared. They were recent. Ariel's breath caught as she lifted one. Ethan stood near a lake, older but unmistakably him. His face was leaner, his hair longer, but those same blue-gray eyes looked straight into the camera. The timestamp at the corner read March 2022. Her knees nearly gave out. It couldn't be. He'd been gone for 8 years. 8 years of grief, of raising their daughter alone, of believing he was dead. And now this. She dug deeper into the box. There were travel documents, medical forms, and one hospital record stamped with a Whitman family crest. The name printed at the top made her chest tighten. Ethan James Whitman, patient transfer authorization. A transfer, not a death certificate. She felt the blood rush in her ears. "He's alive," she whispered, tears flooding her eyes. Then, from behind her, a soft voice said, "You shouldn't have seen that." Ariel turned. Mrs. Whitman stood in the doorway, her face ghost pale, but her eyes blazing. "You have no idea what you've done," the older woman said coldly. "You think you want the truth, Miss Brooks, but the truth will destroy you." Ariel's hand tightened around the photo, her pulse trembling. "Then let it," she said. The photograph never left her pocket. For days, Ariel carried it like a lifeline, stealing moments to stare at Ethan's face when no one was looking. Every instinct in her screamed that Mrs. Whitman's warning wasn't a threat. It was a confession. Ethan was alive. Somewhere. Hidden. Late one night, after Ella had fallen asleep, Ariel spread the stolen documents across her small kitchen table. She traced her fingers over every faded signature, every stamp, every date. Then, near the bottom of the hospital transfer form, she noticed something she hadn't seen before: the address. Charleston Behavioral Wellness Institute. Her breath caught. It wasn't just a hospital. It was a private psychiatric facility outside the city, one that treated high-profile patients under aliases for privacy. Her stomach turned as she reread the name beside Ethan's patient number. Edward James Walters. The initials were the same. EJW. It wasn't even subtle. Ariel didn't sleep that night. By morning, she'd packed a small bag, kissed Ella goodbye at her mother's house, and caught the first bus toward the outskirts of town. The sky was heavy with rain, the roads slick and glistening. As the bus rattled along, she pressed the photo to her chest. "Hold on, Ethan," she whispered. "I'm coming." The clinic sat miles off the main road, surrounded by tall pines and an iron gate that looked more like a prison fence than a hospital entrance. A guard checked her ID and frowned. Visiting hours are limited. What are you here for? My fiancé, Ariel said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Edward Walters. The man typed into a computer, then nodded. He's in Ward C, 3rd floor. Her knees went weak with relief. Thank you, she whispered, gripping her bag. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and something colder, resignation. Nurses moved quietly through the halls, faces blank, shoes squeaking against polished floors. Ariel followed the signs until she reached Ward C. The door buzzed as it opened, revealing a long corridor lined with white rooms and metal-framed beds. Her heart pounded as she walked past each doorway, searching for him. Room 312. The number from a file. She stopped in front of it, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Ethan, she whispered, barely breathing. No answer. She pushed the door open slowly. Inside, a man sat by the window in a plain hospital gown, his back turned. The light from outside washed over him, outlining his figure, tall, lean, with brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. Ariel's heart stopped. Ethan, she said again, her voice breaking. The man turned. It wasn't him. His face was wrong. Older, sunken, his eyes a dull green, not gray-blue. He stared at her blankly, confusion flickering across his face. Do I know you? He asked softly. Ariel stumbled backward, her vision blurring. No, she whispered. You're not. Are you looking for Edward? A nurse's voice called from the hall. Ariel spun toward her. He was transferred out last month, the nurse said. No forwarding address. Family requested full privacy. Family, Ariel repeated, breathless. The nurse nodded sympathetically. You could try asking Mrs. Whitman. She's the one who signed the papers. The world tilted. The walls seemed to close in. Ariel backed away from the room, clutching the doorframe for balance. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. He had been there. She had moved him. Mrs. Whitman still controlled every piece of his life, even his disappearance. And now Ariel knew something she couldn't unlearn. Ethan wasn't just alive. He was trapped. The drive back from a clinic was a blur. Ariel's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, her mind replaying the nurse's words over and over. Mrs. Whitman signed the papers. It all made sense now. The grave with no body, the letter that ended mid-sentence, the ticking watch. Ethan hadn't died. He had been hidden. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, the photograph spread out before her. She traced the outline of Ethan's face with trembling fingers. Why didn't you come back for us? She whispered. Why let us believe you were gone? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop looking. It's not safe. Her heart skipped. She typed back, who is this? No answer. But the next morning, when she opened her apartment door to leave for work, an envelope lay on the floor. Inside was another photograph. Ethan, standing near an old dock by the water, holding a small piece of paper that said Folly Beach. Ariel's breath caught. The same beach where they once planned to run away together. That evening, she made her way there as the sun sank below the horizon. The waves crashed against the shore, the air heavy with salt and memory. For a while, she saw nothing. Then a voice behind her said softly, You still wear the same perfume. She turned, and there he was. Ethan, older, leaner, with faint scars near his temple. But it was him, the same gentle eyes, the same warmth she thought she'd never feel again. Her breath broke into a sob as she ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair. I'm sorry, he whispered. I wanted to tell you everything. I tried. Ariel pulled back, searching his face. You're alive. You let me think you were dead. I had to, he said, voice shaking. My father threatened you. He said if I didn't disappear, he'd destroy you. Take Ella before she was even born. I couldn't risk it. He staged the accident, made me vanish. I agreed because it was the only way to keep you safe. Tears streamed down her face. You think keeping us in the dark kept us safe? I mourned you every day, Ethan. I raised our daughter alone. I know, he whispered, gripping her hand. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it right. For a few minutes, time stood still. The world was quiet, just two souls reuniting where love had once died. But fate wasn't done testing them. A car engine roared in the distance. Headlights cut through the twilight. Ethan's body tensed. "He found us," he whispered. A black SUV pulled up along the shore, doors slamming shut. 3 men stepped out, and behind them, Richard Whitman himself, gray-haired and furious. His voice boomed across the sand. "You were warned, boy." Ariel instinctively stepped in front of Ethan, trembling but defiant. Richard's eyes burned as he pointed at her. "You think you can come back from the dead for her? You'll destroy everything I built." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'd rather lose your empire than lose my family again." Richard's expression twisted with rage. "Then you'll lose both." The sound of a gun cocking broke the air. Ariel froze, her hand gripping Ethan's. For the first time in 8 years, she had him back, and now she might lose him all over again. The storm rolled over Charleston that night, thunder shaking the windows as if the sky itself was angry. Ariel stood by Ethan's side inside the Whitman mansion, her heart pounding. The air crackled with tension. Richard Whitman sat in his study, eyes sharp and voice steady, but the fury beneath it was volcanic. He hadn't called the police, not yet, maybe because he wanted to handle this privately. The Whitmans never liked their mess aired in public. They dealt with problems behind closed doors. And tonight, Ariel realized she was the problem. "You lied to me," Richard said, his gaze fixed on his son. "After everything I did to protect you, this is how you repay me? Protect me?" Ethan snapped, stepping forward. "You didn't protect me. You caged me. You turned my life into a lie. And for what? Because I loved a woman who didn't fit your family's picture." Richard slammed his hand against the desk. "You don't understand what's at stake. This family was built on legacy, bloodlines, name, control. One scandal, and everything collapses." Ariel spoke softly, her voice shaking. "You talk about legacy like it's a crown, but all you've done is pass down fear." Richard's glare snapped toward her. "You don't get to speak in my house." Ethan stepped between them. "You don't talk to her like that," he said, voice low, trembling with rage. For a long, dangerous moment, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock. Then Richard laughed bitterly. "Look at you, my son, reduced to defending the help, throwing away fortune and family for." "Finish that sentence," Ethan said through clenched teeth. Richard's lips curled. "For a mistake." Ethan lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the desk, his face inches from his father's. "Don't you dare call her that again. She's the only real thing in my life. You forced me to disappear, to watch my daughter grow up from the shadows. Do you have any idea what that's like?" Mrs. Whitman appeared in the doorway, her voice trembling. "Richard, stop, please." But her husband ignored her. "You brought this on yourself, Ethan. You could have had everything, but you chose her." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "I chose love, and I'll keep choosing it, even if it costs me your empire." Richard's face reddened, veins bulging in his neck. "You ungrateful fool." He staggered to his feet, shouting now. "You were never strong enough to lead this family. You let a woman." Mrs. Whitman rushed forward. "Richard, enough. You're not well." But he kept shouting, his voice breaking, his body trembling. "You ruined everything. Do you hear me? Everything." Then, mid-sentence, his words stopped. His hand clutched his chest. His breath hitched. His eyes went wide. "Richard!" Mrs. Whitman cried, reaching for him. He gasped once, twice, then collapsed to the floor. Ethan froze. "Dad!" He knelt beside him, panic flooding his voice. "Call an ambulance." Ariel stumbled backward, her heart pounding, the world spinning in slow motion. Mrs. Whitman fell to her knees, sobbing. "Richard, stay with me." But it was too late. The man who had built an empire on control lay motionless, the storm outside roaring as if claiming his last breath. And through the crack of thunder, Ariel realized what this meant. The patriarch of the Whitman dynasty was gone. And now, every secret he'd tried to bury was about to rise to the surface. The mansion felt like a tomb. The morning after Richard Whitman's death, the house was draped in silence. Every portrait, every gold-framed relic of the Whitman legacy seemed to stare down in judgment. The patriarch was gone, and the foundation he'd ruled with iron fists and old money had cracked wide open. Ariel stood by the window, watching the rain blur the world outside. She felt no joy, no relief, just a heavy, strange ache in her chest. Richard had been cruel, yes, but death made even monsters look fragile. Behind her, Ethan sat on the edge of his father's desk, face buried in his hands. His eyes were red, his voice hollow. "It's my fault," he muttered. "He died hating me. I pushed him too far." Ariel turned, her heart breaking. "No, Ethan. He made his own choices. You didn't kill him, his hate did." Ethan looked up, tears streaking his face. "He was still my father." Ariel knelt beside him, resting her hand on his knee. "You try to love him, even when he gave you nothing back. That's more than he ever did for you." Mrs. Whitman entered the room quietly, her usually perfect posture broken. Her makeup was smudged, her pearls missing. She looked smaller now, not the cold, commanding woman who once ruled this house, but a grieving widow. "The lawyers will be here tomorrow," she said softly, eyes avoiding theirs. "He left instructions about the estate." Ethan nodded absently, still lost in guilt. But Ariel could feel something shifting in the air, the weight of secrets waiting to be exposed. The next afternoon, the Whitman family gathered in the library. Dark suits, red eyes, fake sympathy. Richard's brothers, business partners, and distant cousins filled the room, whispering about stock shares and inheritance. Ariel stood in the back, feeling like an intruder. At the front, a lawyer with silver glasses unfolded the will and cleared his throat. Per the wishes of the late Richard Whitman, this document outlines the distribution of his estate. Ethan sat motionless, staring at the floor. Mrs. Whitman's hands twisted the hem of her dress. The lawyer read through the list: properties, assets, the company holdings. The usual. But then he paused, frowning slightly. "There's an additional clause here." The room fell silent. "It states," the lawyer continued, adjusting his glasses, "to the woman my son truly loved, and to the child who carries his name, I leave the Folly Beach property and a trust account to ensure they are never forgotten." Gasps filled the room. Heads turned toward Ariel. The lawyer looked up. "The name listed here is Ariel Brooks." The sound of her name echoed like a gunshot. Ariel's heart stopped. She glanced at Ethan, whose eyes widened in shock. Mrs. Whitman rose slowly to her feet, her face pale, trembling with disbelief. "That can't be right," she whispered. "He despised her." The lawyer cleared his throat again. "It appears your husband made these amendments 3 months before his passing." Ariel's hand shook as she tried to process it. Richard Whitman, the same man who called her a mistake, had left part of his empire to her and Ella. The room erupted in murmurs. The relatives glared at her with thinly veiled disgust. One of them hissed, "She manipulated him." But Ariel couldn't hear them. All she could hear was the echo of Richard's last words. "You'll destroy everything I built." Maybe, without realizing it, he'd built something new instead, something that finally included her. And as the lawyer's voice droned on, Ariel looked down at the letter in her lap, feeling a chill crawl up her spine. Because if Richard had written her into his will, he must have known she would still be there. And that meant he planned for her to find out. The days after the will reading were a blur of whispers, meetings, and venomous stares. Overnight, Ariel went from being the help to being the most hated woman in the Whitman family. The news spread fast. The patriarch's fortune, his mansion, his beachfront estate, all left not to his son or his brothers, but to her, the woman no one was supposed to remember. Ethan tried to protect her, but the phone calls, the lawyers, the threats, they came in waves. Every family member had an excuse. Every cousin claimed injustice. Every uncle spat her name like poison. "You don't deserve any of this," one relative hissed in the hallway as she passed. "You don't belong here." Ariel didn't respond. She'd heard words like that her whole life. But now, every insult rolled off her like water on glass. She had survived worse. In quiet moments, she thought about Richard Whitman's decision. The man who once swore she'd ruined his family had given her everything. Why? Was it guilt? A dying man's attempt at redemption? Or another game? One final twist meant to pit them all against each other? Whatever the reason, his words, "the woman my son truly loved," echoed in her mind. For years, she had been painted as a mistake, a stain on their perfect image. But now, by his own hand, the truth stood in ink and signature. She had mattered. Still, peace was a fragile illusion. Ethan's relatives began circling like vultures. Lawsuits were threatened. Rumors were planted in the press. They called her a gold digger, a manipulator, a liar. And through it all, Mrs. Whitman remained eerily silent, watching from the staircase, her expression unreadable. One evening, Ariel sat in the library, rereading the will with trembling hands. She wanted to understand. There had to be a clue hidden between the lines, something explaining why Richard had changed his mind. She traced her finger over the last line, where his name bled into the paper like a bruise. Footsteps echoed behind her. She turned, expecting Ethan, but instead, she saw Mrs. Whitman. "You must be proud," the older woman said quietly, stepping into the room. "You got what you wanted." Ariel met her gaze. "I never wanted his money, just the truth." Mrs. Whitman's eyes glinted in the dim light. "The truth," she repeated. "And what will you do with it now that you've torn this family apart?" "You can't tear apart something that was already broken," Ariel said softly. Mrs. Whitman's face twitched, the faintest crack in her composure. "You think you've won?" she whispered. "You have no idea what kind of enemies you've made." Before Ariel could respond, a sharp sound split the silence, the crackle of fire. She turned toward the desk. Flames were licking up the corner of the will. A candle had been knocked over, its wax spilling across the paper. Mrs. Whitman stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the burning document, the faintest tremor in her hand. "No!" Ariel lunged forward, grabbing a cloth to smother the fire. The flames hissed, smoke curling into the air, the edges of the document blackened but not lost. She pulled it free, coughing, clutching it to her chest. When she looked up, Mrs. Whitman was gone. The door to the hallway swung gently shut, and in the thick, smoky air, a single pearl earring lay glinting on the floor, the one Mrs. Whitman had been wearing. Ariel stared at it, realization chilling her blood. The fire wasn't an accident. Someone had just tried to erase her from history, the same way they had erased Ethan. The courtroom was a war zone dressed in marble and oak. Reporters filled the benches, cameras clicked like insects, and a Whitman family sat divided down the middle, wealth and reputation crumbling before the public eye. The case had become national news, the Whitman scandal. At the defense table sat Ariel, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. On the other side, the rest of the Whitmans, uncles, cousins, and business partners, stared daggers at her. To them, she wasn't a person. She was the intruder who'd walked off the street and stolen their empire. Ethan sat beside her, jaw clenched, ready to fight. He refused to let her face this alone, but she could see the weight in his eyes, guilt, grief, love, all tangled together. The opposing lawyer, a man with slick hair and a smug smile, stood before the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this entire claim is built on manipulation. Miss Brooks deceived a grieving man in his final days. She used his son to gain access to private documents and took advantage of an old man's confusion. Lies, every word." But Ariel stayed silent, her fingers tightening around Ethan's. When their lawyer rose to respond, his voice was calm but sharp. "The evidence tells a different story. Richard Whitman didn't change his will out of confusion. He changed it out of conscience. He left his estate to the woman his family wronged, a woman he forced from his son's life. The only manipulation here is the one that kept Ethan Whitman hidden for 8 years. Gasps rippled through the court. The opposing lawyer scoffed. "Hidden? Please. The man's dead." That's when Ethan stood. "I'm right here." The courtroom erupted. Shouts, flashes, disbelief. The judge slammed the gavel, demanding order. Ethan's presence alone shattered half the lies that had been spun for years. Then came the witnesses. Mr. Collins, the butler, trembling as he admitted under oath that he'd been ordered to help cover Ethan's disappearance. "They said it was for his own protection," he said softly. but it was about control. Then a financial investigator revealed secret transfers, millions hidden under false accounts, the same accounts that funded Ethan's treatment at the clinic. The truth was out. The empire Richard Whitman built on power and lies was crumbling in front of the world. But the real explosion came when Mrs. Whitman took the stand. Her composure was gone. Her voice shook as she faced the jury. "I love my son," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But I was afraid. My husband, he could destroy anyone. When Ethan refused to obey, Richard told me it would be better if he were gone, that he'd handle it." The room went still. The lawyer pressed, "Handle it how, Mrs. Whitman?" She looked at Ethan, at the living proof of everything they'd buried, and broke. "He told me Ethan was dead, but when the body never came, I knew." Her voice cracked. "I knew he wasn't gone. I saw him. Months later, he begged me not to say anything." "Mrs. Whitman," the lawyer said carefully, "are you saying you knew your son was alive all these years?" Her breath hitched. "He's not dead," she whispered. "He never was." Then her body swayed. The color drained from her face. Before anyone could react, she collapsed against the stand. "Someone call a medic!" the judge shouted as chaos erupted. Ethan leapt to his feet, rushing to her side. Ariel stood frozen, heart pounding. Mrs. Whitman's eyes fluttered open just long enough to meet hers. Her lips moved in a whisper barely audible over the commotion. "He's not the only one they hid." Then her eyes rolled back, and she went still. And for the first time, Ariel realized Ethan's secret wasn't the only one buried under the Whitman name. The storm outside had returned, thunder rolling low over Charleston like an omen. The trial had ended in chaos after Mrs. Whitman's collapse, but Ariel's mind refused to rest. Her words, "He's not the only one they hid," kept replaying like a riddle she couldn't solve. 2 nights later, a message slipped under Ariel's apartment door, jolted her awake. No return address, just one line written in bold, slanted handwriting she knew too well. "Come to the mansion." Alone. Her heart pounded. Richard Whitman had been buried for weeks. This had to be someone's cruel joke. But something deep inside her, that same gut feeling that had guided her through every lie, told her otherwise. When she arrived, the house was dark, its grand facade stripped of the life it once held. She stepped inside, her footsteps echoing across marble floors. The air was heavy with dust and memory. "Hello," she called, voice trembling. "Who's there?" A shadow moved in the study doorway. And then, as lightning flashed through the tall windows, she saw him. Richard Whitman, alive. He looked older, thinner, his hair streaked with white. But his presence filled the room like smoke. He smiled faintly, the same cruel twist of the lips that had haunted her for years. "You're supposed to be dead," she whispered, backing away. "I was," he said calmly. "For a while." Ariel's pulse roared in her ears. Why do this? Why fake your death?" Richard poured himself a drink, as casual as ever. "To see how far you go. To see what kind of woman could bring down a Whitman legacy with nothing but pity and a pretty face." Her stomach turned. "You're insane." He took a sip, unbothered. "You think you're the first to define me? My son did it, and look what it cost him. I gave you a gift, Miss Brooks, a chance to prove who you really are. And you did." Her voice shook. "You destroyed lives for a test." He leaned closer, eyes cold. "I revealed truth. Ethan was weak. You, however, you have fire. You're the kind of woman who could run this empire. That's why I left it to you." Ariel's breath caught. "You left the will?" He smirked. "Of course. Who else could manipulate a courtroom, twist sympathy into strength? You remind me of myself." Her hands trembled. "I'm nothing like you." Richard's expression darkened. "No, you took my son's name, his bloodline, his legacy, and now you think you can walk away?" A sound broke the tension, the faint creak of the front door. Ethan stepped into the room, his face pale, but eyes blazing. "You've said enough, old man." Richard turned, startled. "You?" Ethan held up a small recorder. "I knew you couldn't resist talking about yourself. I've been recording every word." For the first time, fear flickered across Richard's face. Ethan's voice was calm but firm. "The world will finally know who you are. What you did. To me. To her. To everyone. Richard lunged forward, but his age betrayed him. His drink fell, glass shattering. You'll destroy the family name. Ethan stepped closer, his tone steady. You already did. The thunder cracked again outside, shaking the walls. Richard's knees buckled, his pride collapsing with him. Ariel watched as the man who had ruled generations now cowered before the truth. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of him. She looked at Ethan, tears blurring her vision. It's over, she whispered. He nodded, holding her hand tight. No, he said softly. It's just beginning. Within a week, the Whitman name was everywhere, on every television, newspaper, and screen in America. The story that had been buried under money and power for decades was finally out. The heir who'd been forced into hiding, the father who faked his death, the family empire built on lies and racism. Ethan's recorded confession of Richard Whitman's manipulation spread like wildfire. Every cruel threat, every word of arrogance, proof of what the world had suspected but never dared to say out loud. The once untouchable dynasty had fallen. Ariel watched it unfold from the small living room of her apartment, Ella curled beside her, head resting on her shoulder. Reporters called her the woman who broke the Whitman curse. Some praised her for her courage. Others accused her of destroying a family legacy. But Ariel didn't care about legacy anymore. She cared about freedom, her own and her daughter's. Ethan refused to appear on camera. I've lived too long in the spotlight my father built, he'd said. It's your turn to live in the light, not under it. Ariel smiled when she thought about that. After years of lies, they finally had peace, or at least the closest thing to it. She found a new house outside the city, small and bright, surrounded by trees instead of secrets. Ella had her own room, painted in soft lavender, filled with drawings of beaches, stars, and the word Daddy scrawled in crayons. Their days were quiet now. Morning walks to school, late-night talks on the porch. For the first time, Ariel felt something that had always escaped her, stillness. One evening, as she tucked Ella into bed, her daughter looked up at her and whispered, Mommy, is Daddy okay now? Ariel brushed her curls back gently. He will be, baby. He just needs time. Ella smiled sleepily. He'll come home soon. Ariel kissed her forehead, whispering, I hope so. But as the days passed, something gnawed at her. Ethan had promised to come by after the court's final hearing, to see Ella properly for the first time without fear. Yet weeks went by, and there was no call, no message, no knock at the door. One afternoon, a letter arrived, plain white envelope, no return address. Her stomach dropped before she even opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable. My love, if you're reading this, I've done what I should have done years ago. My father's empire is gone, but his enemies aren't. I can't put you and Ella in danger again. You've already lost enough because of me. You once told me love should free us, not chain us. I understand that now. I'll be watching from somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. Tell Ella I love her. Tell her I'm proud she has your strength. And when she's old enough to know everything, tell her father never stopped fighting for her. Forever yours, E. Ariel's hands trembled as she pressed the letter to her chest. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees like the ocean calling for miles away. Ella's laughter echoed from her bedroom, pure and unbroken. Ariel wiped her tears and smiled through the ache. Ethan had vanished again, but this time she understood why. He wasn't running from her. He was protecting them both. And for the first time, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt free. The Whitman mansion was nothing more than a memory now, a hollow skeleton of stone and silence. Years of neglect had claimed it, vines curling through the cracked windows, dust swallowing the marble that once gleamed beneath chandeliers. But for Ella Brooks, now 26 and a newly sworn civil rights lawyer, the house was not ruins. It was history, her family's history. The afternoon sun spilled over the overgrown garden where her mother once worked as a maid. The same garden where Ethan and Ariel's love had been buried, and where truth had finally clawed its way out of the earth. Ella stood at the gate, her briefcase hanging at her side, the wind tugging gently at her curls. "Mama," she whispered, smiling sadly, "I made it." Her mother's voice still lived in her head, gentle, firm, full of fire. "Use what they try to destroy you with, baby. Make it power." And Ella had done exactly that. She'd graduated at the top of her class, fought her first case against a housing company accused of racial discrimination, and won. Every victory, she knew, was her mother's too. But today wasn't about justice. It was about peace. She stepped through the broken front doors. The inside of the mansion smelled of dust, wood, and faint salt from the nearby sea. The portraits were gone, but the ghosts remained, whispers of old wealth and older sins. On the second floor, in what used to be Mrs. Whitman's study, Ella found a small trunk buried under fallen plaster. The brass lock had rusted with time, but when she pushed, it popped open. Inside were papers yellowed with age, property deeds, photographs, and at the very bottom, a faded leather-bound book. Her mother's diary. The edges were soft, the pages rippled from old tears. Ella sat by the cracked window and began to read. Each page carried Ariel's voice, heartbreak, and hope inked side by side. She wrote about the first time she met Ethan at the diner, about losing him, about raising Ella alone. She wrote about finding courage in every breath. As Ella turned the last few pages, something fell out, a loose sheet of paper folded neatly inside. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was different, masculine, graceful, familiar. Her heart stopped. It was Ethan's. For Ariel, "If time had mercy, I would have grown old beside you. But love, true love, doesn't end with distance or death. It lives in every heartbeat you gave to our daughter. You made her strong enough to carry what we could not finish. I never stopped loving you." Ella's hands shook. She pressed the letter to her chest, feeling the echo of her parents' love ripple through the years. Outside, the wind stirred the tall grass, carrying the scent of salt and wildflowers, as if the sea itself remembered them. She closed the diary and whispered, "They didn't destroy you, Mama. They built me." As she walked away from the ruins, the sun dipped low, painting the mansion gold one last time, not as a monument to power, but as a grave for hate and a cradle for love reborn. Would you forgive the family that destroyed your life? Tell me in the comments below.